The fluorescent lights hummed above, a constant, unforgiving drone that seemed louder than usual that morning. My hand trembled as I held the pink slip, its crisp edges biting through the quiet of the office. The words on it blurred for a moment, not because I couldn't read them, but because my mind refused to accept the absurdity. Fired for missing a single meeting. Around me, the office was still. Too still. The faint tap of a keyboard, the soft murmur of the air conditioner, the occasional squeak of a chair, it all sounded like accusation. Every sound became a reminder of how suddenly, and unfairly, everything I had worked for was stripped away. I glanced at my desk, empty now, sterile, as if it had been sanitized of me, of my presence. My sweat, my hours, I felt it then, that hollow pit in my stomach, the icy betrayal curling up through my chest. Not anger yet, but the raw, stinging disbelief that comes when someone you trusted wields power with cruelty instead of fairness. My boss's face floated in my mind, calm, polite, yet cold. There was a smile, yes, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never had. I sank into my chair, letting my fingers hover over the keyboard, thinking about the late nights I'd spent perfecting presentations, the times I had stayed behind to cover a teammate, the moments I had swallowed my own pride to keep projects alive. And now, in a single, paper-thin instant, all of that seemed meaningless. A clock ticked somewhere in the background, a sharp, solitary sound that seemed to mock me. Time, I realized, doesn't pause for injustice. It marches on, indifferent, leaving you to pick up the pieces, and yet, even as the cold knot in my stomach grew tighter, a tiny spark flickered somewhere beneath it, stubborn and faint. Maybe this humiliation, this blatant betrayal, could become more than a wound. Maybe it could become a weapon. That's when I realized this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a story that would be told in whispers, in courtrooms, in the quiet reckoning of truth. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew the world was about to witness the fallout of lies, of exposure, of deception. In its rawest form, I've always been the kind of person who shows up early, stays late, and carries the weight of other people's mistakes as if they were my own. Work wasn't just a job. It was a piece of me, a dream I had nurtured through late-night applications, weekend projects, and the constant whisper of one day, this will be yours. Every spreadsheet I perfected, every presentation I stayed up polishing, was a quiet declaration. I belonged here, and I would not be overlooked outside the office. Life had a softer rhythm. Early morning coffee, the smell of rain on pavement, my sister's laugh echoing through the phone. The small joys anchored me, reminded me there was a world beyond fluorescent lights and endless emails. Weekend hikes, quiet dinners with friends, the satisfaction of finishing a book that made me forget time. I clung to these moments like lifelines. They were my peace, my quiet proof that the world wasn't all cold offices and whispered judgments. And yet, cracks were beginning to show, almost imperceptible at first. Ideas I had championed were dismissed in meetings, with a casual shrug or polite nod that barely hid the patronizing smile. My emails, once answered promptly and thoughtfully, now lingered in silence. Or worse, they were ignored altogether. Invitations to collaborative projects no longer arrived in my inbox. Subtle snubs became patterns, and patterns became an uncomfortable truth. I was being edged out, not for my work, but for something deeper, something personal. I remember one particular Friday. I had stayed late to finish a report for a client, my fingers sore from hours at the keyboard, my eyes heavy from staring at spreadsheets that blurred into one another. As I walked toward the exit, I passed my boss's office. He glanced up, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, quickly replaced by a polite, almost mechanical nod. No encouragement, no acknowledgement of the countless hours I had put in, just a quiet dismissal that stung more than words ever could. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe it's a bad day. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm overthinking. But over the following weeks, the evidence mounted. Meetings I should have been invited to pass without a word. Praise for my work arrived in vague, generalized emails addressed to the team, never to me directly. It was subtle, surgical, even an erasure of my presence that no one else seemed to notice. And in those moments, as I sat at my desk staring at my reflection in the darkened screen of my monitor, I realized something. Loyalty and hard work alone weren't enough in a place where politics and favoritism ruled. Trust could be broken with a single look or a single deliberate omission. And that realization? It was like a shadow settling in the pit of my stomach, dark and quiet, waiting for the spark that would ignite it into something unignorable. That spark, I didn't yet know, would come sooner than I expected. The morning began like any other, sunlight spilling weakly through the blinds, dust motes drifting lazily in the thin shafts of light. My desk felt unusually cold, the chair beneath me creaking in protest as I shifted. Then he walked in, my boss, calm, composed, a clipboard in hand, his eyes betraying nothing. I thought I had seen that expression before, polite yet distant, but this time there was an edge, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the hum of fluorescent lights. "I'm going to have to let you go," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "You missed a meeting yesterday. It's unacceptable." For a moment, the words hovered in the air, suspended like smoke. My brain refused to catch them. Missed a meeting. That's it. After everything I've done. My hands, resting on the smooth edge of my desk, trembled slightly. I felt the office shrink around me, the walls seemed to lean in. The hum of computers and distant chatter now sharp, accusing. I tried to process the absurdity. But I stayed late all week. I finished the project early. My voice faltered. There was no room for defense, no acknowledgement, just the cold efficiency of his decision. Coworkers avoided my eyes as I gathered my things, the faintest whispers brushing against my ears. "Did you hear? She's gone." Fired over one meeting. The words weren't meant to sting, but they did. They cut, slicing the fragile shield I had built around my pride. My reflection in the glass of the office door was pale, taut with disbelief. My chest tight with the strangest mixture of humiliation and disbelief. I sat in the empty meeting room for a long moment after, hands clasped tightly, staring at the polished wood of the table. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering occasionally, casting shadows that seemed to mock me. I could hear the faint tick of a wall clock, each second echoing like a judge's gavel. How had it come to this? How could years of loyalty and effort be erased with a single, trivial excuse? Anger began to simmer, slow and deliberate, coiling in my chest. Not the fiery, uncontrolled anger of a moment, but the quiet, potent kind that sharpens your mind, that refuses to let injustice pass unchallenged. I remembered every late night, every missed lunch, every time I swallowed my frustration to keep the work flowing smoothly. All of that, gone? And yet, beneath the humiliation and confusion, a strange clarity emerged. I studied my boss's face again, noting the subtle twitch in his smile, the way his eyes never truly met mine. There were cracks in the mask he wore, tiny imperfections that told a story he was desperate to hide, lies, deception. Power wielded carelessly. Without conscience, I left the office that day carrying more than a box of belongings. I carried a realization: betrayal can be quiet, almost imperceptible. It can sit in emails that omit you, in projects you're excluded from, in a meeting that never happened. And it can fester, unnoticed by anyone else, until it demands attention. That day, as I walked past the humming fluorescent lights and the faintly judging walls, I felt a spark flicker, small, fragile, but insistent. One day, this betrayal would meet its reckoning. Returning to the office after that first day of humiliation, I felt as though I were walking into a maze of invisible traps. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher now, casting sharp, unflattering shadows across the walls, and the faint hum of the AC had taken on a sharper, almost accusatory tone. Each step toward my desk was measured, careful, as though one wrong move could make the ground beneath me crumble. The whispers followed me like shadows. "Did you hear? She's trying to fight back," one coworker murmured, eyes flicking toward the corner of the room. Another smirked, typing furiously, a vague email addressed to the team that omitted me entirely. The office had become a theater of subtle sabotage. Gaslighting dripped through meetings, ideas I suggested were dismissed, only to be praised later when someone else repeated them. My contributions became invisible, my presence a question mark. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office, the door closing with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should. "I noticed a few errors in your last report," he said, voice measured, almost casual. "I expected better from someone with your track record." He slid the file across the polished desk. I opened it, my heart sinking as I realized he had altered key data points, framing them as my mistakes. I don't understand," I stammered. looking up at him, searching for a hint of acknowledgement, a shred of fairness. But his expression was serene, almost cold. "Mistakes happen," he said. "You need to take responsibility for your work. Responsibility but not accountability." The distinction was clear, and the more I tried to argue, the more the words seemed to twist, turning back on me, leaving me questioning my own judgment. The manipulation wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was the quiet, surgical things, the subtle delays in approving my projects. The last-minute assignments dropped on me to ensure failure. The casual conversations that hinted at incompetence. I could feel it seeping into my mind, the steady drip of doubt. Confusion coiling around my confidence. For a while, I almost believed it, almost swallowed it whole, feeling my pride erode one imperceptible notch at a time. Yet in the midst of this quiet storm, something began to shift. Every subtle insult, every orchestrated error, every cold glance became fuel rather than poison. I started keeping careful notes, documenting emails, meetings, and every interaction that hinted at manipulation. Shadows became witnesses. Silent corners held evidence. And slowly, the simmering anger within me began to crystallize into focus. I found myself replaying moments over and over, not in bitterness, but with precision. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he twisted words, the way the office seemed to bend around his whims, all of it formed a map. A roadmap of lies and deceit waiting to be exposed. I began to anticipate his moves, to navigate the maze with the careful strategy of someone who refuses to be trapped again. By the end of the week, I wasn't just surviving the office, I was observing, cataloging, preparing. Quiet strength grew inside me, patient and deliberate. Like a shadow stretching its fingers toward the light, I stayed calm, but every nerve was alert, every eye flicking for cracks, every word and gesture stored carefully for the day it would matter most. And in that quiet, simmering preparation, I realized something essential. Revenge doesn't need to roar. It only needs patience. It only needs clarity. It only needs to wait until the moment when truth itself becomes unavoidable. I sat in the quiet of my small apartment that evening, the hum of the city outside barely reaching the cocoon I had built around myself. The apartment was dimly lit, the soft glow of a single lamp pulling on the hardwood floor, casting long shadows across the walls. I stared at the pile of notes and printed emails I had collected over weeks, the subtle manipulations, the omissions, the lies carefully stitched together, and for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity piercing the fog of humiliation and doubt. I held a single email in my hand, one that seemed innocuous on the surface, a forwarding of my project with deliberate changes, hiding my contributions, and making it appear incomplete. My hands shook slightly as I read and reread it. Every small injustice I had endured, the altered reports, the whispered exclusions, the casual dismissals formed a pattern, a roadmap of deceit that could no longer remain hidden. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about justice. I stood and walked to the mirror hanging on the wall, the reflection looking back at me, pale and worn, yet alert. I studied my own eyes, searching for fear, for hesitation, for doubt, but found instead the spark of resolve. "I won't stay silent," I whispered to myself, the words strange and powerful in the quiet room. Not anymore. The mirror reflected not just my face, but the determination growing inside me, slow and deliberate. Like a shadow stretching toward the light, I began organizing my notes, stacking documents into categories: evidence of exclusion, falsified reports, manipulated timelines. Each page, each email, each altered record became a brick in the foundation of the strategy I was beginning to see clearly. I wasn't just preparing to fight, I was preparing to win, to make the truth undeniable. At that moment, I realized the weapon I had was not anger, nor revenge for its own sake. It was patience, meticulous observation, and the careful accumulation of truth. Every subtle injustice I had suffered became fuel, but not in the fiery, destructive sense. Rather, it became a precise tool, calibrated and measured, to expose lies without question. I remembered every dismissive glance, every meeting I had been excluded from, every casual misdirection meant to confuse me. They were no longer wounds, they were clues. A pattern emerged from the chaos, a story of deception that, once told, could not be ignored. I could almost see it unfold, step by step. The courtroom was a final canvas on which every hidden truth would be painted in full clarity. As I sat back, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, replaced by a sense of anticipation. I could almost hear the subtle ticking of the clock in my mind, marking the passage of time toward the moment when every detail, every carefully preserved piece of evidence would come together. And in that anticipation, there was peace, quiet, deliberate, powerful. That night, I finally understood. Awakening isn't just about seeing clearly. It's about deciding. Deciding to act, to assert boundaries, to reclaim what has been denied not through fury, but through strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. And as I turned off the lamp, letting the shadows reclaim the room, I whispered a silent vow. The truth will have its day, and justice will follow. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and solemnity, a quiet weight hanging in the air that seemed almost tangible. I sat in the witness chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, heart steady despite the storm of nerves beneath. The soft echo of footsteps on marble floors resonated in my chest like the tick of a distant clock, each one marking the inevitable march toward truth. When my boss walked in, suit crisp, expression unreadable, I felt a calm clarity settle over me. This wasn't a battlefield for yelling or grandstanding, it was a stage for precision. Every carefully preserved email, every altered report, every note I have made over weeks became ammunition, and for the first time, I felt fully armed. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp, demanding attention. "We will hear the case of Ms. Your Name versus Boss's Name," the clerk announced. The courtroom seemed to shrink, every face a potential witness to the unfolding drama. I took a breath, feeling the weight of every injustice, every dismissal, every whispered slight I had catalogued. It all led to this moment. When my boss took the stand, I met his gaze steadily, letting the silence speak before I began. "Can you explain why these reports show discrepancies?" I asked, voice calm but firm, presenting the first piece of evidence. He faltered for a split second, a micro-expression that almost went unnoticed, the twitch in his smile, the hesitation in his tone. Shadows revealed cracks that his polished exterior could not hide. Piece by piece, the web of lies unraveled. Emails were read aloud, timelines traced, and subtle manipulations exposed. Every carefully orchestrated omission, every altered contribution became a clear, undeniable pattern. The murmurs of the courtroom were soft but perceptible, a current of anticipation that built with each revelation. The silence wasn't awkward, it was expectant, the air heavy with the weight of truth. "You claimed these mistakes were mine alone," I continued. "But here are emails showing you forwarded altered files to other colleagues, omitting my work entirely. Can you explain this?" He squirmed, the first real crack in his composure. The subtle confidence he had wielded like a shield in the office could not withstand the spotlight of documented evidence. Each document, each timestamp, each record served as a mirror, reflecting his deceit for all to see. I stayed calm, letting the evidence speak, letting the courtroom itself deliver judgment with its quiet, impartial gravity. It was not my anger that mattered, it was the truth I had cultivated, painstakingly and patiently. That carried the day. By the end of the hearing, the narrative was complete. The strategy had worked, deception had met meticulous documentation, and manipulation had met unflinching resolve. The judge's gavel struck once more, and the verdict rang clear, precise, and deserved. Justice had been served, not with theatrics or vindictiveness, but with the quiet satisfaction of a carefully executed plan. Walking out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun struck my face, warm and forgiving. Shadows of the past office, the whispers, and the humiliation seemed to dissolve with each step. I felt light, not because I had won, but because truth had found its voice and I had given it form. In that moment, I realized revenge isn't chaos. It is clarity. It is the patient alignment of truth, courage, and timing. And when executed with precision, it is poetry, quiet, elegant, and undeniable. The streets outside the courthouse were quiet, almost reverent, the soft rustle of leaves and the autumn breeze punctuating the hum of distant traffic. I walked slowly, letting the warmth of the afternoon sun spill across my shoulders, feeling it soak into the tightness that had held me for months. It wasn't triumph in the way I had once imagined, no gloating, no victory dance, but a calm, settling clarity that felt like coming home after a long journey. The office, the whispers, the cold stares, they were all ghosts now, dissipating with each step. I realized that the weight I had carried wasn't just from the injustice itself, but from the silence I had allowed to linger. Speaking, acting, standing firm, it had released a burden I hadn't known I was carrying. There was freedom in truth, a peace that was quieter than applause but infinitely more enduring. In the following days, life began to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Friends and colleagues reached out, some hesitant, some apologetic, recognizing the integrity I had maintained. Professional doors opened with new possibilities, not because of revenge, but because justice had restored the clarity of my reputation. I noticed how my own perspective had changed, patience, observation, and deliberate action had replaced impulsive frustration. I carried myself differently, lighter yet grounded. Aware that boundaries weren't walls, they were declarations of self-worth. I often found myself reflecting on the process, replaying moments in the courtroom, the silent preparation at my desk, the long nights with documents spread before me. It wasn't about victory over a single person anymore, it was about integrity, about standing for what is right even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. And in that reflection, I felt a quiet pride, not from defeating someone, but from refusing to be defeated by circumstance, by lies, or by fear. Even the small things began to feel meaningful again, the way sunlight caught the edges of buildings, on my morning walk, the way a friend's laughter sounded richer, the quiet satisfaction of completing a project with honesty and tact. Life had regained texture, depth, and rhythm. And I understood that the true reward of the struggle was not retribution, but self-respect restored and lessons etched into memory. And when I looked into a mirror, I didn't just see a reflection of my face, I saw patience, vigilance, and courage staring back. Shadows of the past lingered, yes, but they no longer intimidated. They reminded me of the journey I had endured and the resilience I now carried. The world hadn't changed entirely, but I had, and that change was the most profound justice of all. I've learned that silence isn't weakness, it's a language, a weapon, a shield. Boundaries aren't walls. They are declarations of who you are and what you will not allow. Justice doesn't always roar, but when it arrives, it echoes louder than any fury. Sometimes the quietest fight speaks the loudest truth. Sometimes patience, observation, and courage carry further than anger ever could. And in those moments when the world finally listens, the truth doesn't just surface, it demands recognition. So, if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or silenced, remember, the strength you carry in quiet resilience has the power to change everything. Speak when the time is right, act when the moment is certain, and let justice unfold with deliberate precision, because in the end, it's not about revenge, it's about clarity, integrity, and the undeniable triumph of truth. And that, in itself, is the loudest victory of all. If the story resonated with you, drop a comment sharing a time you stood up for yourself. Don't forget to like the video if you felt inspired, and hit subscribe to join me for more cinematic stories of justice, courage, and life lessons.